I'm Sandra Smith, and the faculty chair of the program in criminal justice. This afternoon, we have the great pleasure to welcome DA Rachael Rollins to the PCJ Speaker Series. As many of you know, DA Rollins has been DA of Suffolk County since January of 2019. And she was voted into office by constituents who wanted real change to the criminal justice system. Indeed, this is what DA Rollins has promised, and it seems to be what she's doing. Decarceration, reducing racial inequities, devoting her office's resources to serious and violent crimes and offenders, as well as improving the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. Although we are not here to judge in any way, thus far it appears that she's making good on a number of her promises. DA Rollins has been an attorney for 20 years. She holds degrees from Northeastern University School of Law and Georgetown University Law Center. DA Rollins was appointed by former Governor Deval Patrick to the Judicial Nominating Commission. And she is also the past president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association, and she was also elected and served a 3-year term to the Boston Bar Association Council. She is a recipient of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association's Trailblazer of the Year Award, and was selected as Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly Attorney of the Year in 2018. She also received the Ida B. Wells Barnett Award for the Boston branch of the NAACP. We asked DA Rollins here today to get her take on how we might reimagine community safety, what it would take to get there, and what role prosecutors, progressive or otherwise, can play in achieving this goal. Let's all welcome DA Rollins to the PCJ in the quiet way that we do, because we're doing this remotely. There'd be lots of clapping right now, DA.
Great.
Yeah. Right, there you go. So we're going to do this the way we usually do it, which is a conversation where I ask the DA a set of questions, and she will respond to whatever degree she feels comfortable. And after about 30 minutes of this, maybe a little bit less, I will hand it off to my co-organizer, Chris Winship. He will ask a couple of questions before we open it up to the audience to ask whatever questions they have. And then we'll wrap up around 5:45. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Okay. So there you are. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you until this point. So you built a reputation as a reform-minded, or progressive prosecutor. So what does it mean exactly to be a progressive prosecutor as opposed to a traditional prosecutor or whatever else you call the folks? What have you done so far? And again, there's no judgment. We're getting started. We're getting warmed up. What have you done thus far and plan to do that will be consistent with being a progressive in this role?
So I think defining progressive is usually somebody in this role who is thinking differently about what public safety looks like, who's thinking differently about communities that are most impacted by violence, that have the most encounters with law enforcement, the most encounters with prosecutors. And so when, I talked about who I was going to be as district attorney when I was running for office, and I ran for office at the ripe age of 47, had never run for office before in my life, thought I was a great American because I voted, and then pulled the curtain back a little bit to see this world of campaigns and elections that I had never understood before. I wanted to make sure, honestly, Sandra, that I didn't lie to anyone. I took very seriously the vote of people, of all people in Suffolk County. I never wanted to be somebody who snuck in and then became something that people were like, who the hell is that person that we just elected into this 4-year role with near complete autonomy? So what I did was I was very honest about who I was going to be. 6 weeks prior to my primary on September 4th, 2018, I put up a list of 15 or so categories of crimes that I was going to switch the presumption. The presumption of normal's the wrong word, of DAs prior to this progressive movement, people think that the answer to everything is jail. There's one toolbox. You open it, there's a huge hammer that says jail, right? You trespass, jail. You murder, jail, right? And it's like, well, wait a minute. Can we get a couple of other tools in this toolbox? I think progressive prosecutors are starting to add more tools in the toolbox, but I'll be very honest. I inherited an office where the 15 areas of crimes that I said in the first instance we aren't going to prosecute, my predecessor in 60% of those cases declined them anyways. He just didn't say it out loud. So, you know, I like to push back when people say like, the world's going to end. DA Rollins is now here and crime is going to be everywhere. And I say, well, wait, do I get credit for the 60% that my sort of conservative, never talked out loud about it predecessor did? And you can yell at me from 61% on or not. So again, I think we talk about things differently. We are smart on crime with limited resources. And remember, people, I have 350 employees, a budget of $25 million. Tom Glenn is laughing right now because Tom Glenn has a budget of like, he's like wakes up and wipes his forehead with $25 million budgets. And I had the pleasure of working for Tom Glenn, with Tom Glenn at Massport, and learned a tremendous amount from him. And then we handle 25,000 cases a year, right? So what am I doing with my very limited resources, with my overworked state, you know, employees? This is not Bain Capital where we can just fling more money at people or send them away for a weekend in our London office to rejuvenate and then come back better. How do we motivate excellence in the government when they have a monopoly and don't have to be great, right? Because where else are you going to go to get your license, says the RMV, right? Or we don't have to be nice to you. We're going to prosecute you anyways. We're the DA's office. So it's a lot to hear, but we think about things differently. We talk about things differently. And what I've done since coming here, Sandra, is I've issued the Rollins memo. I have created the first in the nation discharge integrity team, where when an officer involved shooting happens, whether the person lives or dies, and it is not just a shooting, it's a discharge by the officer. If it was a tase, you know, they were tased. If they were chokeholded, we have 4 individuals, a community member, a criminal defense lawyer, a judge, and an active member of law enforcement. And I'm the 5th member. We meet outside of the office. That's the first in the nation. That's how we investigate officer-involved shootings. I created an integrity review bureau, not just conviction, which is, if we look at John Rhoda there, let's say John is 43 years old and got arrested at 21. And from the day he was arrested and served time has been screaming, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. Well, on his 49th birthday, someone finally looks at Mr. Rhoda and says, oh my God, it appears you were right. You didn't do it, right? John gets out. Nobody wants to wait 38 years for that to happen. So it's conviction integrity, it's case integrity, which I'll talk about. It is sentencing integrity, and then it's the lead database, which is our Brady list. And for the non-lawyers, that is not Tom Brady. It is the United States versus Brady, which is, we have an obligation as prosecutors to turn over exculpatory information. So we've done a lot. We have a lot more to do. Much of it has worked. There are things that haven't. And the other thing I learned as a leader is, when things aren't working, you are just as loud when you make a mistake as you are when you do it right. So I have had to say in certain circumstances, that was not accurate when I said that, apologies, or that didn't work. We will do it differently moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So when we talk about reimagining community safety, mostly I think when people think about law enforcement, they're thinking about police. How do you retrain police? How do you change the rules or reform policing, et cetera? I think relatively rarely do people think about prosecutors, despite the fact that they're pretty central to this whole process. And, you know, there are a number of folks who would argue that prosecutors have been key to making sense of this kind of, you know, mass incarceration and other really serious problems that are associated with the criminal justice system. Given the central role that prosecutors play, how would you reimagine community safety? And in some ways, I feel like you're already telling me by describing the things that you and your office have already sought to do. What role do you think prosecutors can play in achieving this vision? and what can be done specifically in Suffolk County to meet the longstanding needs, and specifically of communities that have historically been marginalized.
So when we think about prosecutors, remember just how many types of prosecutors there are, right? So there's Andy Lelling, the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts. There's Maura Healey, the Attorney General in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts is different. We only have one U.S. Attorney. There are other, California has many, New York has many. We just have U.S. Attorney Lelling. Every state, though, only has one Attorney General. So we have our Maura Healey. And then Massachusetts has 11 district attorneys. Other states have dozens, right? Other states have fewer than that, right? But essentially, when we think about prosecutors and mass incarceration, it's actually the district attorneys that are most responsible for filling up the prison. So like everyone who's recording this, I am giving props and shout outs to U.S. Attorney Lelling in that he is not the one that is, you know, mass incarcerating or has been in the past. It's not overwhelmingly the federal government where that's happening. It is at your local prosecutorial level. And remember, the difference between U.S. Attorney Lelling is appointed, right, and is a, you know, a member of the administration, essentially, serves at the pleasure of the president or the Attorney General. And essentially, Maura Healey and myself are elected, right, to our position. So when I think about who is to blame for mass incarceration, if those are even the right words, it is not the federal government that is mass incarcerating. It is overwhelmingly not the Attorney General. It might be different in Washington, D.C., because there is not a DA in D.C., but for most of the places, it's the DA. So that's number one. Number two, when I think about public safety, I actually don't think about, Sandra, like prosecutors. If we want to reimagine what it is, I think about a thriving community. I think about excellent schools, housing, jobs. I think about the fact that when I visit my family in West Roxbury and drive down that gorgeous road with, you know, 100-year-old trees lining either side of the street and open green spaces, right? And very few liquor stores and other things that I see when I'm in Roxbury, for example, or we're fighting in Roxbury to try to keep trees because the city wants to just cut them down for other things. That's what I think about. I think about access to food, right? I think about, you know, and this sounds good, but let's be very realistic, people. Chelsea is part of Suffolk County. Chelsea, Massachusetts, which since COVID-19 hit, has been the #1 place where people are testing through the roof with respect to positive COVID tests. Chelsea has the Tobin Bridge going through it. It has Logan Airport with flying planes directly through it. And it has the largest private food distribution center in the United States of America. Some of you might be saying like, oh, that's great. Well, then they can fly wherever they want and drive quickly. Yeah, except there are emissions flying all the way through Chelsea. And you know what Wellesley doesn't have? The Tobin Bridge, right? And Tom Glenn can attest to this too. When planes fly over the W towns, Waban, Winthrop, Wellesley, you know, Weston, you get it, right? Our wealthy W's. The phone is ringing off the hook, not to us, but to the FAA about like, this is loud in my neighborhood. Meanwhile, Winthrop is shaking in its boots because there are planes flying through people's living rooms, right? So we have to realize that the people in Chelsea are also our first responders, and not just police, fire, and EMS workers. These are the people that kept us all alive, that work in supermarkets and restaurants, that work in hospitals, in transportation, in sanitation. They don't get to Zoom into meetings, and they don't have time to go to community meetings to say, I don't want a bridge in my city, right? I don't want this happening here. They're just trying to homeschool their kids, right? Who, oh, by the way, have IEPs and speak English as a second language, many of them, and the gap is widening in our education system. So all of this is related, guys. I know you might be saying, she has lost her ever-loving mind. Why isn't she just talking about crime? If you don't see that housing is the biggest issue that I have in the Boston Municipal Court and in the Chelsea Division, Chelsea District Court, which are my two municipal and district courts, I welcome you to come or Zoom into one of our meetings. Those are the biggest issues. So when I think about community safety, I don't think about prosecutors. I think about thriving communities. I think about if Roxbury got to be Wellesley every time we woke up, or Weston or Waban, then we'd be a lot safer. If we had school systems that were working for us and all of those other things, that is what drives public safety.
Thank you for that. The sociologist in the office, in the audience, wouldn't be surprised by the things that you just mentioned. I suspect other folks wouldn't either. So here's the next question. You mentioned earlier that you were taking steps to better address officer-involved shootings. I would love actually to know more about this process that you put into place, because it's one of this type of encounter with police is one of the things that I think has bedeviled us. A lot of people feel like that is often dealt with unfairly. And so it sounds like your office has attempted to deal with this in a way that will produce more fairness and justice.
Yeah, so what we have seen, sadly, as a nation is, and where we find ourselves in this moment is watching George Floyd's murder, Ahmaud Arbery's murder and execution, seeing what happened with Breonna Taylor. We have seen systems where, things went wrong, right? Now, or I'm not saying mistakes were made, people lost their lives, right? And I need to preface this by saying, I am the daughter of a veteran. My dad is a Vietnam War veteran and was a corrections officer. I have an uncle that gave 30 years to the Mass State Police. I have great uncles that have served this country as Marines, members of the Airborne Rangers, you name it, we have done it. I have a very healthy respect for law enforcement and for the people that serve our country. Period, hard stop, new chapter. What I will say though is with law enforcement is that we have the power to legally and lethally kill without having to make a phone call first, so we don't get to make certain mistakes. It is an incredibly hard job that none of us would sign up for, even if we were paid 3 times the amount, and these men and women put their lives on the line every single day. What I will say though is law enforcement and communities of color, overwhelmingly Black and brown communities, suffer from the same problem with the media. We only see people that look like John Rhoda not doing the great job he does every day at his work, not as a culturally competent man, not as all the beautiful and excellent things he has done, and I'm sure decades of exceptional service. No, we see people that look like John when they are a Derek Chauvin. That's what we see. And we don't see people that look like me or Black men or, Cape Verdean or Dominican men doing wonderful things in the community, principals, working at Massport, right? Working as district attorneys. We don't see that. We overwhelmingly see them committing crimes. And it is these negative stereotypes and images that are playing themselves in our minds. So what I do, Sandra, is I speak out loud all the time about disparities. I speak out loud about stereotypes. And I made sure that when I started, I had this vision of like almost the NTSB, right? Whenever there's a transportation related accident, the NTSB deploys experts out to that space to make determinations quickly. So I just put together a sort of NTSB team of a community member who runs a community health center. So she is fluent in trauma in the community of Suffolk County, the communities Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, where 70% of our non-fatal and fatal shootings and non-fatal and fatal stabbings are happening in those 3 neighborhoods in Boston. So we have a community member who is also a survivor of homicide. We have an excellent criminal defense lawyer who also used to run the homicide unit in Middlesex and Suffolk as a prosecutor. So ambidextrous, David Meyer, excellent person who's done innocence work as well. We have a retired Superior Court judge who has handled many, many homicide trials, motion practices, et cetera. And then we have an active member of law enforcement. So if the state police discharge their weapon, it's going to be a Boston police officer that I put in that seat. And if the Boston, Chelsea, Winthrop, Revere, or Transit Police discharge that weapon and harm, it's overwhelmingly going to be a state police officer that I put in that seat. And the reason it's only Boston and the state is because Boston is one of 3 places in Massachusetts, 3 or 4, that can actually investigate their own homicides. Anywhere else in the state, when a homicide happens, the state police are handling that. There's a couple nuances, like a DCR facility, the state police would do it in Boston too, but you get it. So what we did is we set up a group of experts. I'm the 5th member, and although, yes, I am still, this is the, the throne, right? Like, I am still ultimately the decision maker. It is not siloed. It is not one person in their office for 2 years with the door closed. I meet with the family who lost who lost a loved one. I meet with the community. I send my condolences or speedy recovery wishes to the officer. Luckily, we have not lost an officer. We have had an officer, Whalen, that was harmed in the first officer-involved shooting we had on February 22nd, 2019. And then this process starts, and it is a long and thorough process, but we are presented to, and we keep communicating back out to the community.
So when you say it's a long process, what are we talking about? And then, if I'm a skeptic, I would say, well, you have a judge and you have police officers of one form or another who are investigating other police officers. Isn't there a kind of bias there? Wouldn't you expect them to be kind of more open or to why what the officer did made sense? I could see someone being concerned that having people in those roles take on this kind of committee work could produce more bias.
Yeah.
More bias.
So let's talk about the way that it's done now. It is a prosecutor's office that 95% of the time, at least, we are walking hand in hand, skipping and singing together with the police in 95% of our prosecutions, because 95% of our potential defendants aren't police officers. They're the people on this call. They are civilians, they are residents, they are individuals in crisis. They are people where we find them. Those same relationships that we have, that over 95% of the time are positive and we are moving in the same direction. We are aligned with respect to what the process is going to be. It changes when the officer is now being investigated by my office. The way it used to work before me and works around the country is that one prosecutor in the office gets handed a file and says, Brian, you need to look into Katarina's, the shooting by Officer Katarina. Brian goes in his office, nobody hears from him, he's doing other stuff. We hopefully believe Brian has never worked with Officer Katarina before, but Brian alone gets to make this decision. Usually 2-3 years later, out walks Brian with a report that overwhelmingly, Sandra says, reasonable and justified. Community's never been spoken to. People are waiting for information. What I've done is remove it from my office completely. So my discharge integrity team, we don't even meet in my building. We meet once a month in a law firm away from my building, because I want them to understand this is no longer being done the way it was before. It is removed from the office. It is not even just me alone, Sandra, and I don't know any of these officers. I came from the federal system, so the FBI, DEA, ATF, HHS, all of those agents I'd had lots of cases with, not necessarily Boston Police, State Police, Winthrop, Revere, and Chelsea. You're right, we have a retired judge, an African-American retired judge who worked in the Roxbury Division of Boston Municipal Court and the Superior Court. We have a criminal defense attorney who used to be a prosecutor, you're right, but now is an exceptional criminal defense attorney, has worked on innocence claims, well respected by the community. And yes, we do have an active member of law enforcement, and I hope we get to it. When we talk about this move to defund the police, and those are not words I would have chosen, the police need to be at the table. They do, because what can't happen is people who have never set foot in a situation where that can change in an instant, right? And go from what appears to be docile and quiet to deadly. in a matter of seconds, making decisions about individuals that are trained to do their work and that have a skill set, right? So again, how we've done it differently is, yes, we have included the police. Yes, we have included judges, but we've been deliberate about who we are asking. So of my 4 discharge integrity team members, half of them are people of color. A quarter of them are women. Who did I ask to do this? Who are the people that we are involving in this process? And like the community, which I say needs a seat at the table as well, I believe law enforcement does too, because it's not fair, even me, Sandra, as the chief law enforcement officer of Suffolk County, I've never been a police officer, right? So I am the chief law enforcement officer. I have been a prosecutor, you bet I have, but I need Detective Lieutenant Murphy or, you know, a detective on the Boston Police Department to walk me through when I'm listening to ShotSpotter. Why does that sound? What's that deeper noise? Oh, that you can tell what type of gun that is. If these are the 2 guns, that's why. How is ShotSpotter activated? What does ballistics look like? Is there, you know, what's all the video evidence? Walk me through what the body camera would look like. Can we get an expert in here to talk to us about reaction time when a car is coming toward you, how quickly that car is moving, how many seconds it takes for you to turn? Those are the type of things that we're doing that are law enforcement experts, that are judiciary, a judge who can say, you know, I understand you have a question about this. That would never be admissible, you know, in a trial. That would never get past this hurdle or whatever, or maybe it would, or maybe it wouldn't. But that's why we wanted many different people at the table.
Okay. Thank you. You said earlier you would not have used the term defund. What term would you use? Clearly they would be at the table for you. Is there some way that you would limit the kinds of things that they would do? You would change some of their functions? How are you thinking about this this moment when we're talking a lot about defunding?
Yeah, I mean, look, people are angry. People are very angry with what they have seen on TV, right? And what I think is happening is with the advent of cell phones, you know, I'm old enough to remember going to sleep and not knowing anything about what was happening in the world, and then waking up and having to read an actual newspaper to figure out what the hell was going on. And it's like, oh my gosh, we landed on the moon, you know, or whatever happened. Whereas now we are just inundated with billions of things in real time. There are people that are suffering from vicarious trauma as a result of watching executions, right? Which I would argue that is what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. I would argue that is honestly what happened to George Floyd as well. And so for me, you know, I look at this and say, people are justifiably angry, and we have to recognize that there are certain communities that are like, oh, something's wrong, let me call the police. And they have just wonderful encounters with law enforcement. They have members of their family, you know, they have only had positive interactions. And there are other communities that just have not had that lived experience. And I will go even farther to say that in the community I chose to live in when I came to Suffolk County, which is Roxbury, which is, you know, beautiful and vibrant and wonderful, but watching the news, you'd never know that. I look at it and say, if law enforcement is constantly here and the only thing they're doing is traffic stops and low-level like crime arrests, but we have 1,367 unsolved homicides in Boston that I inherited dating back to the 60s, that doesn't look like good management to me, right? And the community does not understand the difference between a B2 officer in Roxbury and a detective in the homicide unit. If the police are knocking at the door and saying, Rachel, we're here about your nephew so-and-so, he trespassed and we're here to arrest them, and they don't know that I have an unsolved homicide from 11 years ago that the Boston police have never knocked on my door about, we've already lost, right? The community looks at us and says, you guys are crazy. And I say us because I'm a member of law enforcement now, which is hard to remember, but I am, right? And I'm proud to be a member of law enforcement right now. But remember that same Rachel that opens the door, or if somebody were to knock on my parents' door in Cambridge, they have a daughter that is the district attorney of Suffolk County. They have two sons that have been served time in state or federal or local prisons or jails. They have a daughter that's in active recovery, and they have another daughter that's the executive director of the Red Sox Foundation. Those two parents created all five of us. We were raised in the same house, and none of us are just defined by the things that I said to you about. I can be a complete asshole and need to be better in many other areas of my life, but I'm also the DA of Suffolk County. I am a flawed individual. There are things I've done I'm not proud of. Just like I have siblings that are convicted felons and are better than me in many other ways as well. None of us are defined by our best or our worst moments. So when I think about reimagining law enforcement, I talk that way because ultimately my parents are potential grand jurors in Middlesex County or trial jurors in Middlesex County, right? Or jurors in federal court. Right? Because remember, they take the jury pool in federal court from our entire state. And if the only interaction they've ever had with law enforcement is negative, or if law enforcement treats my parents like crap because they're coming after one of my brothers, my parents didn't do that. It's displaced anger and rage. Don't do it because you're impacting my potential grand jury and jury pool. Or if they witness a crime, are they going to come forward and say something and help the police if every interaction they've ever had from them or with them is negative? Think that way about it. And we are the government. I end with, we're the government. We don't get to have a bad day. Right? The community does. And if you signed up to be a police officer and wanted to be treated nice all the time and not yelled at, you're in the wrong profession, just like me, right? Nobody's ever like, hooray, the DA's coming, we love you. That rarely, if ever, happens, even in my house, right? When I come home to my children, right? So we have to be better and recognizing we need to be Teflon tough when it comes to the disparagement we might get from the community.
My time is up, but I'm going to take a few more minutes and ask you about this recent report that came out of Harvard Law School, and it was about racial disparities in Massachusetts criminal system, specifically the court system. I know that you're familiar with it because you wrote an op-ed that got published in the Boston Globe about the significance of these findings and what it means in terms of needing higher quality data, more data, sharing data. Can you, for my last question, can you both share with me what it is that you found surprising in terms of the results of this report? And also, what kind of data needs do you think are most pressing, at least for your office?
Yeah, so what was most surprising, the disparities weren't surprising. Anyone who's paying attention to these type of issues, the numbers should not be surprising at all. And before we start, Sandra, we just really have to give all due respect to the late, great Chief Justice Gantz, who died of a heart attack, but 4 years ago commissioned this study and gave Harvard Law School unprecedented access to data and information because he understood how important it was for us to measure ourselves, right? And so thank you to him for that. We had a tremendous week. He passed, and then Justice Ginsburg passed. This came out, we had we had the Long and the Evelyn decisions by our Supreme Judicial Court, looking at things differently with respect to Black people and our encounters with law enforcement. So the disparities, racial and wealth-based disparities, not at all surprising. The complete lack of data was terrifying to me. The fact that 7 DAs of the 11 of us, over 7, I think, refused to give any data. Obviously, I gave data, clearly, but I'm just saying, what? And then many police departments and other members of law enforcement were non-responsive when it came to asking for information. Or think about when we just recently at the federal level, we got some information about, officer-involved shootings. As of right now, we remember, and this is nonpartisan, but I'm just saying, It is factual that when Attorney General Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General, he completely stopped the work of the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Justice. So there were multiple consent decrees that had come down from our federal government that is able to look at all of our different states and say, yikes, Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, you know, please, my God, stop doing that. We're going to withhold federal funding if you continue. All of the things and the leverage that the government usually has. When you have a police department that is under a consent decree, right, who is then told, nope, you're fine, just regulate yourself. What is that saying, right? Like, what is that saying to this police department? You know, I would argue, please stand by, right? Go forth and be as you were, nothing to see here. So for me, when we later hear that many of those same police departments aren't reporting officer-involved shootings that are happening because our government makes it voluntary, like, spare me with your voluntary nonsense. Nothing that we do as prosecutors is voluntary, right? Make sure that we are holding people to the same standards, right? And for me, your zip code should not determine outcome in the criminal legal system. Your melanin count should not determine outcome, nor should your job title. So if prosecutors are never prosecuted, or police officers are never prosecuted when we engage in harm, and we are people just like the people that we protect and serve, right? We just, you know, have different jobs that we go to during that time. So it was the lack of data that was shocking to me, and the just the brazenness of people that would not participate. And then you have to understand our data collection systems are the oldest, most horrible things I've ever seen. Like, I remember the movie War Games, where there was a computer that was as big as my house, and it, like, our computer system is older than that weird game computer that said, like, do you want to play a game, right? Ours is older than that. Our system is called Damien, and it's old. It does not speak to other systems. All of our law enforcement partners aren't sharing data with each other. Even 2 years after the 2018 crime bill required that we do so. I was just on a call today, I will give her props, with Chief Justice Carey of the Trial Court of Massachusetts. They are now going to be putting out data from FY 2019. Yay, except we have nothing to compare it to, but we take our small victories, right? But just, we are 2+ years late. And we are in Massachusetts, guys. Like, we have MIT, Harvard. We should have, like, robots and avatars pulling our information out in our criminal legal system every single day. We aren't. We are decades behind where we need to be with respect to collecting data. And that's what I was most concerned about.
Okay, thank you for that. I wish that I could keep talking to you, but I have to hand it over to Chris and then the audience. Chris?
Sure. DA Rollins, thanks so much for coming this afternoon. So an important alternative to incarceration is various diversion programs. And I wondered if you could talk about the diversion programs that your office is using, something about what degree they're successful, what type of people are being sent into them.
Sure. So there are many different sort of populations of, many different populations of people that come in contact with the criminal legal system, right? So right now, when we look at Mass Ave and Melnia Cass, which I would arguably say is ground zero for our sort of opioid substance use crisis in the Commonwealth that we are seeing nationwide. But, you know, we have community partners that we work with to make sure that, for example, you know, we aren't trying to arrest our way out of an opioid or substance use crisis we find ourselves in. But where things are more complicated are, self-harm is very easy to sort of feel sorry for and say, like, okay, Rachel needs help, she's using. But when I am, you know, violent and mentally ill, the services become smaller, right, for individuals that are engaged in that type of behavior. Even though, Chris, the root cause of the problem is the same, right? The trauma or the addiction that's there. So we have community programs or diversion programs that we look at with respect to substance use and the opioid crisis. We have community partners like ROCA, a program that operates in Chelsea, Boston, also has, Lynn, places in Lynn that it is working, Springfield, Massachusetts, I believe, where we have high risk young people, usually 15 to, ROCA is great because they're increasing the number. It used to be like 17 to 21 or 2. Now it's 15 to 24 or 5. But what we are doing, Chris, is we are looking at those partners to say, ROCA is the group that you're not ready for anything. You are actively involved in harming yourself and your community and others. And that is one of the community partners we have. We also have some youth programs that we work with, Youth Build and Youth Connect and others, where we are, through juvenile systems, having those entities assist us with respect to young people that come in contact with the system. We have a couple of specialty courts, Chris, as well. We have Veterans Court. I'm going to a graduation tomorrow. That is in the Boston Municipal Court. Judge Sinnott is a veteran herself. She runs that court and does an amazing job there. We have, drug court. We have mental health court. So we have many different ways that we are sort of putting people before specialists to assist them prior to branding them with a criminal record that might have, dozens, if not hundreds of collateral consequences later. So yeah, we're working. And then, Chris, we are always looking for new partners to work with, right? So that it can't just be everyone goes to ROCA, we only have 5. And you're saying, but I'm 37 and have never harmed anyone. And I'm saying, go to ROCA, right? Like, we need to make sure we have tons of different conversations with community about gaps in the system, areas where we are not servicing communities well. And are there new nonprofits or entities that we can start saying, this is where we need more help in this area? Let's think creatively about things like that. But those are some examples.
Yeah, ROCA is terrific. How much evaluation is being done? You spoke about data problems, and so I'm sure evaluations are a big challenge of the effectiveness of these programs as an alternative to incarceration.
So what's great is I just signed something earlier today about having my chief of innovation and strategy, which is a new concept, right? Prosecutors, DAs usually hire lawyers, investigators, and victim witness advocates and admins, but we have a licensed independent clinical social worker. We have a chief of innovation and strategy. We have a data technologist. What we are doing is we are signing up now to have the Division of Unemployment Assistance look and see, are people that touch the criminal legal system working afterwards? How long are they employed? We are working with some other partners, hi lovely, to see about how are we measuring success, right? As somebody who I have shared before, my lived experience is such that, I have prosecuted, my background is overwhelmingly federal, Chris. So I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office for almost 5 years. I prosecuted someone in the same courtroom that I sat in and watched my younger brother get sentenced by Judge Young. And he received a fair sentence. This was not a miscarriage of justice in any way, shape, or form, but he was one of the people, I think, where the system worked and got it right. But I always wonder, could there have been other options with respect to 3 years serving in Pennsylvania, right? And remember, guys, just to kind of point out the disparities in the system, nobody said to my family like they are to Aunt Becky from Full House or Felicity Hoffman, who has got 11 days and people are, have a single tear saying, but she's going to have to do 8 days with good time. It's like, Aunt Becky, when the federal judge is saying, we'll do everything we can to make sure you're close to your family, that's not usually how the system works. Jeffrey Epstein, before taking his life, who spent more time out than he did in when he was serving his sentence for all of those vile crimes that he, committed. That's not the way the system usually works. So, for me, I want to make sure that there are options and level opportunities for everyone in the system. And when it comes to sort of calculating data and seeing if we're successful, I am much better now at getting bi-weekly briefings from the people that work for me about crime, right? I don't want to be the person, I inherited an office where I'm honest, 98% of what we do is reactionary. We just sit and wait for the phone to ring, for the Commissioner Gross to call me and say, Rachel, we have full notifications. Somebody was just shot in the head in Dorchester. He has passed. His body is there. The community's out. We're on our way. We'll see you there. Okay, of course I have to take that call. How are we trying to prevent that from happening? How are we using every piece of data we have to say, who are the 50 people that we believe are driving 70% of the violence in Boston, right? 40%, 50% of the violence. Where are all the shootings happening, right? What are we doing? Are we putting our resources there? So those are ways that we're thinking about all this stuff, Chris.
I have other questions, but I think we should open it up to the audience since time has passed. So Brian or Linda, Sandra, are you handling the questions?
I'm fine to handle it. We need some questioners. If not, I'm happy to keep going with my questions.
Well, I'll ask another question.
Well,
So
Frank,
we have some hands
Frank
raised.
is waving his hand. Chris is hogging all the questions. Let Frank get one. Go ahead, Frank.
I think I'd start by saying, I hope you stay as DA for a long time before you run for governor.
Oh, please.
But I'll support you on either one. I just finished, and I'm actually wrapping up 4 years of working with prosecutors around the country in an executive session called Reimagining the Role of the Prosecutor in the Community. And one of the, by the way, 4 of your counterparts were in the conversation: Kim Fox, Lenise Washington, Darcel Clark, Sherry Boston, from all over the country. And you would have been too, but we started in 2016. But one of the constant issues was, how are you working with your ADAs to change the culture and the incentive system? Because in many ways, the greatest resistance came from within the office to doing things differently. Yeah, that's right. So talk about that a little bit, if you would. Right.
Totally. So Frank, you hit it on the head. I was ready for police unions. I was ready for the media, maybe not as much. I think I was a little naive. I thought judges would push back. I'm proud of they pushed. We pushed too. But I will tell you, the hardest, and it's actually not even like leadership in my office. It's like mid-level, entry-level pushback, right? Of bucking the system, right? And so what are the things that we try to do? So my memo, I'm very proud of, we put it out, but your policies aren't worth the paper they're written on if you aren't training people on it. And training doesn't matter if you don't audit, right? So I like to say to my staff, and again, I know I seem like I am single black female on Tom Glenn, but he is just so very good at this stuff. There was an auditor that we had a chief auditor at Massport, right? The prosecutors don't understand, how are we checking to make sure the things that we are supposed to be doing every day are actually happening? I don't get mad, Frank, at the mass bail fund. I don't get mad at Court Watch because they're telling me things that are contrary to what I'm believing is happening every day in my system. So I look at this and I recognize that even though I don't like when things don't work the way they're supposed to, how am I reacting to that? Like, how am I retraining my staff to make sure when we fail to move for dangerousness against somebody who is dangerous, and then the mass bail fund comes and presents $15,000 to bail them out. Forget about even being a lawyer. That's just bad sportsmanship. If somebody has thought of a way to work a system that we didn't think of, that we're now going to bang our hands and say this isn't fair. We have to own the fact that we should never be talking about dangerousness if we haven't moved for 58A under Massachusetts law. So, I think, for me, I look at culture as being incredibly important. It's not just my policies, but yesterday we started, Frank, our new assistant district attorney training. And originally my staff wanted 30 assistant district attorneys. I said, no, you get 22. And we're going to work on giving money back to the community so that they can assist us with some mental health matters that we're working on for the population that we're serving. We're going to not increase our footprint, because that's not what people want, is more prosecutors and a bigger footprint from our office. We are going to do better at giving back. But I will say, I look at this, and what I have demanded is that my new ADAs visit the Nashua Street Jail, right? Mandatory, because that's where you go if you can't post your bail, or when we do find you dangerous and a judge says, okay, Brian Welch, you are now detained. I find you dangerous and you will be held until your trial date moving forward. If we have the power to do that, you have to have set foot in the place that we're sending you, because my new ADAs, assistant district attorneys, are overwhelmingly privileged of some sort because we can't pay them well. That's not a disparagement of them. It's that as new lawyers, the starting salary is $62,500. If you have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, and we are Boston, Massachusetts, unless you live in the woods, in like Maine or New Hampshire somewhere, you're paying a significant rent to live near Boston, New York, San Francisco. It requires a level of wealth or privilege in order to take this job, because many people can't afford to take it. So we train you, but we make you go to the places that we send people. We have panels of survivors of violence, of homicide, of sexual assault. We have panels of returning citizens. We have criminal, and not like, Jasmine Oliver spent a weekend in college, with her best friends at a bachelor party and spent the night in jail once. No, I'm talking about somebody who spent 17 years in federal prison and is now returned back and is gainfully employed and moving on with their lives. How does the system impact people? Survivors, returning citizens, criminal defense attorneys, judges, visiting jails. We are doing things very, very differently here in Suffolk County. And then I myself visit jails often. So I have been probably to DYS facilities, obviously to South Bay and Nashua Street in Suffolk County. And then I go often to Norfolk, MCI Norfolk. I've been to Susa Baranowski, Shirley Medium, Concord. If I have the power to send people places, I need to go as well.
Thank you for that. So now it is Jasmine, Olivier's turn. Jasmine?
Hi, yes, thank you so much.
I know you didn't spend the weekend in jail, so I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. So thank you so much, DA Rollins, for such an insightful talk. And so as someone who studies policing in Boston for my dissertation, focusing on a public housing development in JP, I have questions that are somewhat specific to that. So the first is about the most recent mayor's task force on policing. You spoke at length about how your office handles issues of police misconduct and how you take it seriously, but is there any communication that will happen between your office and the mayor's task force, and if so, in what capacity? And the second question is about the issue of homelessness and trespassing, and so you talked about that a bit. I've gone to so many community safety meetings across the city, and the issue that's generally brought up is trespassing and how it seems that it's not something that's necessarily addressed or prosecuted. And so as someone who believes in diversion, right, and not just arresting your way out of a problem, I guess my question to you is, in issues of like homelessness and in the public housing development I study, sometimes there's homeless people who sleep in the hallways, right? And so
Is it Bromley Heath?
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so that's an issue that's brought up a lot, right? And so what is your office working with any community organizations or thinking of any initiatives to help those individuals who are dealing with those issues, and instead of arresting them for merely sleeping in the hallway?
Yeah, no. Those are great questions. And I met with the Civic Association there and have done walkthroughs. Bromley Heath is probably, as the crow flies, less than a mile from my house right here in Roxbury. So Mildred Haley, as they call it both. But okay, so let me start with the mayor's task force. What I think was great about the task force is right before this, the mayor declared racism a public health crisis. He put together a task force that Wayne Budd, the former U.S. attorney in Massachusetts, chaired. I did make it clear that, you know, I was hopeful there were going to be more sort of local prosecutors or former assistant district attorneys on the task force. What I think the mayor did exceptionally well, he had people like Allison Cartwright, who is a criminal defense lawyer that works constantly in the Roxbury division of the Boston Municipal Court. So he has people that are actually in the work of what the Boston police do. Very rarely, aside from the 9 police officers that were just indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Boston Police Department, are the Boston police interacting with the federal government. It's occasional, but not often, right? So when I see that we have a former U.S. attorney running this, it's important because Wayne is brilliant and he was a great selection there. But I wanted to make sure and was happy to see that the mayor also made sure that there was some line sort of county, state level sort of prosecutors there. I think overall it's very good, right? And the fact that they finally have done away with the community ombudsman oversight panel, they call it co-op, which had no teeth. It was a gumless little entity. And why it had no teeth is because there was, there's no subpoena power, right? So it was basically like begging for documents and then giving a recommendation to the commissioner who could just look back and say like, yeah, no, right? So now this new entity, which is OPAT, right? The Office of, Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, now has the full investigatory and subpoena power, which is powerful and important, right? And then there's going to be different units within that, like OPAT. So there'll be 3 commissioners, and then underneath it, there's an executive director, an administrative staff, internal affairs oversight panel, which has 5 members, and I think a civilian review board with 7 to 11 different members. All good. I think it's going to be really helpful to have a diversity and inclusion unit, which the mayor contemplated, expanding body-worn cameras. I think it's ridiculous that no body-worn cameras are on when you're in overtime. 90% of the things that happen when, you know, you guys see them on the news are protests, and everyone's on mandatory overtime. So like we have no body-worn camera footage, or rarely any in those circumstances if the people are on overtime. So that's, I think, we're exposing some problems. Where I have concerns is, you know, right now this civilian entity is going to review and conduct inquiries as written into in-custody deaths or serious bodily injury, excessive use of force resulting in death or serious bodily injury. That's just not even legal, right? Like there can't be a, you know, executive order by a mayor to like usurp the power that the legislature gave to the DAs to investigate death. The 11 of us in Massachusetts, we are the only state in the United States of America where the DA from death to sentencing oversees everything. All of my counterparts, Frank, Kim Fox, Sherry Boston, Darcel Clark, they all jump in post-arrest. In Massachusetts, no arrest can happen on a homicide without the DA saying, I authorize that arrest. Now, they can arrest you for the armed robbery you did when somebody died during that armed robbery, but they can't charge you with the murder until me, my first assistant, or the chief of my homicide unit says, we agree with that, we can do it. So this commission can't just say, and now we're doing it too. And we aren't the Commonwealth or lawyers or prosecute, like that part will clean up quickly, but I think overall, very good. I'm proud of the fact that we've done it. But that's one of many things, Jasmine. We also have City Councilor Campbell, Arroyo, and Mejia, who have a city ordinance right now that they are contemplating regarding the Boston Police. We have our legislature that are sitting in limbo right now, sort of waiting, the joint committee, what's going to come out, what does that look like from the House proposal, the Senate proposal, what Governor Baker proposed, what that's going to look like. And then with respect to homelessness and trespassing, huge issue, right? Because we need to be clear, Jasmine, the people that live in Bromley Heath deserve to be able to walk out of their homes without having to step over Rachael Rollins, who is drunk and asleep in front of their door, is using their laundry room as a bathroom, and you know, wreaking havoc or not leaving that area. But do I think if Rachael Rollins has significant mental health issues or is homeless, that prison is or jail is the right place for Rachael? That's where we have to start thinking creatively, is if the civic associations are telling me, please get Rachael Rollins out of here, we can't use our laundry room because literally she's using it as a bathroom, a toilet. I can't bring my kids outside to play because when we open the door, she's yelling or in crisis in front of where my children come home from school now that they're going to school or want to go out and play. It's those type of conflicts that we have to be better at. And I believe you're right. Like, the response is not jail, but where are we going to put Rachael Rollins? That's what we have to start thinking about. That's going back to Sandra. Where is the housing opportunity for Rachael Rollins, right? When we shut down the Long Island Bridge, there is, you know how people are like, follow the breadcrumb. There's not even breadcrumbs. There's just an enormous loaf of bread the size of the city of Boston that is wonked down on the floor from the Long Island Bridge to what we are seeing on Mass Ave and Melnia Cass. There are hundreds and hundreds of beds and treatments and services and opportunities that are no longer there as a result of that bridge coming down. And I'm not saying it should have remained up, but these are hard problems and solutions we need to be talking about, right? So I agree with you. It is something we struggle with. And making it even more complicated, my youngest lawyers, my youngest, newest, most green lawyers are the ones that are handling all of these problems, right? Because the trespass case, Jasmine, is not going to be direct indicted up to the Superior Court, is not going to be in front of Judge Roach with my most senior prosecutor in my office. That's going to be handled by somebody that got out of law school 8 minutes ago, might have been raised in North Reading, is coming to this community and has not interacted with this community often. It's why cultural competence is so important, and that type of training is so important. So we can talk after this too about what you're doing, and JP, I'd love to work more with you.
So given the last set of comments, specifically about access to food, housing, et cetera, I want to have Evan McKay ask his question before we go to Linda Robson. Evan?
Sorry, yes, I am here. My question was about the political role of district attorneys. DA Krasner has endorsed Sheriff Rochelle Bilal. In Queens, there were endorsements for state assembly candidates. What are the positions, either elected or appointed, that you think people should be paying more attention to, especially here in Suffolk County?
Evan, such a good question. So, look, I think it was, for the people that are actually happy I'm the DA, and I'm fully aware that there are some that might not be, but you know, a perfect alignment of things that happened prior to me running for office, right? The ACLU did an amazing job with what a difference a DA makes, right? They had this nationwide campaign. They focused on a few races in Massachusetts. Suffolk County was one of them, luckily, where they did a lot of the legwork. They didn't endorse a candidate, but they did tons of polling, tons of education about how important DAs are. I think what we're seeing now with this reckoning we find ourselves in the nation is mayors, right, appoint police chiefs. Police chiefs aren't elected. They are appointed by mayors. So any mayor that says, like, I don't know, what is my chief? It's like, yeah, you appointed him or her. Like, get control of the person that reports to you or get a new person in there. So remember, that's number one. And then mayors as well with police unions. And I have no problem with unions fighting for their membership. I'm the proud daughter of 2 union members. My mom was in 2 unions, right? As a Boston teacher and a school nurse. She was in the nurses union and the teachers union. And my dad was a teacher for over 40 years in Boston public schools. Unions are important. Police unions do exceptional work for their membership, but they are different than any other union because they have the ability to label you as like soft on crime or anti-union, and they get us on both sides, right, with that. So mayor, for sure. I mean, governor, when we think about in Massachusetts, there are 11 district attorneys and we are countywide. There are 14 sheriffs and they are countywide, and the number should add up, and this drives me bananas, but like one of my colleagues, DA Sullivan, has 2 counties together, so he has 2 sheriffs. I only have 1. I have Sheriff Tompkins from Suffolk County. But remember, those are just the houses of corrections. We elect the people that are seeing that. With the Department of Corrections, which is where you are sent if you get 2.5 years all the way up to LWOP, life without the possibility of parole, that's the executive, that's the Secretary of EOPS, the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. That's Secretary Turco. If you don't like what's happening in our prisons, who your governor is matters, right? If you're terrified about the fact that a couple months ago, the top 10 places of hotbeds of COVID-19 activity, 8 of the 10 in the United States were carceral facilities. The other was a meat packing plant and that Navy ship where Trump disparaged the Navy captain who marched off to like cheers. You cannot socially distance in prison. I don't care how good you are as a warden, you can't, because when you sleep, unless you have a single cell, you are within 6 feet of the person you're sleeping next to. Not to mention there's an open hole where people use the restroom. And if it's your cellmate, this isn't a roommate or a friend, it's somebody who's using the restroom right there. So by definition, we can't do it. Governor, with the stroke of a pen, can change things immediately. And then sheriffs are very important. I think after DAs, sheriffs are going to be the next iteration of who are we hiring, who are we electing to these positions? What are we doing? You know, and again, we've seen with U.S. attorneys, you know, those are appointed positions. Who's going to be our U.S. attorney in the next administration? What are they doing? What are they focusing on? But those are some positions for sure.
So I'm going to see if we can get 2 more questions in. The first from Linda, and then maybe Ken Kavanaugh. Linda?
Yes, thank you so much. You actually touched on it a bit in your previous answer, and I was wondering, you know, there are so many players in the criminal justice field, and for those of us who represent one of those.
Linda, you're a bit muffled.
Sorry, for those of us who represent one of those agencies, if you have advice on how we work with the community and work with community advocates and activists on that fundamental challenge of the system being so fractured, and usually our scope and our charter is severely limited. We only have influence on one small part of the system. And how do we work with the community when they are saying, you know, it's outcomes, these outcomes are bad, these outcomes are racist. And yet we as players only have authority in a small area. You know, how do we overcome that together with our community partners?
I think that, yeah, great question. So for me, you know, I would push back and say, if you are working for somebody who is appointed, look around you. Is there anyone from the community that you are overseeing that works with you? What are you doing to make sure that the people making decisions are actually impacted by the work that you do, right? Like, so for me, for example, we just had 22 new ADAs, assistant district attorneys, that started. 13 of them live in Suffolk County. I like to say, as I said, 350 employees I'm responsible for. There's only one person that's obligated by statute to live in Suffolk County, and you are looking at her, right? You have to be 3 things to be the district attorney. Alive, I am, a lawyer who won the election, and a resident of Suffolk County. That's it, right? So for me, having people that are currently living in this community, or my voice saying to them today, even if they don't live in Suffolk County, and half of them about half of them don't, the court you work in is your community now, right? You act as though when you are seeing someone there, this is your neighbor, your relative, your loved one that is before you. And what is the best outcome? Because we represent the Commonwealth, right? Like, I don't know where you work, Linda, but I like to say to people, and sometimes their heads explode and other times they're like, yeah, righteous, man. I'm the Commonwealth. So if it's the Commonwealth versus Rachael Rollins, I am there for the victim, if there is one, for the witnesses, for the families of both of those people, for the community, the Commonwealth, and Rachael Rollins. I get it that Rachael has her own lawyer, but she's part of the Commonwealth too, and so is her family, because they all pay taxes into a system that is prosecuting them or judging them or making decisions about them. So what I would say is, we have to start talking to each other. Right after George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, the trifecta, which of course is 3 iterations of murders ago, right? I made a statement on June 1st in front of the mayor, with the mayor, about being exhausted. And I then called upon my law enforcement partners as the chief law enforcement officer and said, we are going to have a closed door confidential meeting on race, policing, and the Black community. And we are going to either scream and yell, but at the end of this, like the sheepdog and the coyote and Bugs Bunny, we're shaking hands and we are walking out. And because this is an arranged marriage. I'm not going anywhere until I decide not to run again, or until the people of Suffolk County, which they have every right to do, to say, well, that was crazy, and we don't want 4 more years of that. Thank you, DA Rollins. We'd like it to be DA Hartman now, right? Or DA Winship or DA Smith or something else. But what I can tell you is, we need to start having this conversation, because they were upset with words I said, and I said back to them. I was restrained and said half, if not a third, of what I really felt. So I thought I should be saying, you're welcome to you. And the fact that you were offended, we have a lot to talk about. What is beautiful about that, guys, is since June 18th, our first meeting, we have had about 6 meetings where it has been amazing. Colonel Mason from the state police, Commissioner Gross from Boston, Chief Keyes, which is Chelsea, Green is Transit, Delahanty is Winthrop, and Callahan is Revere, and myself. We all sit and we talk all the time now. And we don't agree on everything, but we agree on many things. And then we agree to disagree on the things that we don't. But we are starting to have conversations. And even with my lead database, our Brady list we talked about, I met with them before I gave it to the media. I gave them a courtesy copy of that in an Excel spreadsheet prior to turning it over to the media. Because even if they're going to be upset that there are 136 names on that list, I can respect them enough to not make them have to read the Herald and the Globe to find out who the people that they work with are that are on my list. We're partners, right? And they can't get them off the list unless I say they aren't. Why am I penalizing them for this? Let's think about ways we can come together.
Well, that is our time, and I won't hold you any longer as much as I would like to. I'm sure other folks would too. There are about 4 or 5 other people who would love to ask you questions, but we'll let you go, have dinner with your family. Thank you so much for this. I have taken mine off mute, so if others can do that too and give So, DA Rollins, a hand, a round of applause, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Maybe we can send these questions your way, and if you have
Sure.
time at some
I'd love
point,
to.
you can answer
I'd
that.
love to.
That would be great.
And Frank, make sure you tell those fabulous women they're doing a good job. I'm going to tell them I met with you today because we text all the time. But
Oh, do you really?
keep up,
Okay.
yeah, keep up the good questions, guys. We need to have conversations like this in order for things to start changing.